Thanks everybody for joining us this morning. Clearly, I had to get my energy up with a little bit of Adele. And I'm not even an Adele fan, but the first time I ever heard the song, it made me want to move. It made me want to move. And that was a long time ago. Can you imagine? This song is like 10 years old now. It's so crazy that time is just like flying. I'm super excited for us to be here. I know that I've talked to many people about this idea of radical candor. And lots of people who are here on the actual call today, I had conversations with before the session started, and I spoke specifically about this session and how important radical candor can be for your organization. And yeah, now we're here. We finally get to talk about it. Before I jump all the way into it, just a couple of things that I want to make sure that we do a couple of housekeeping things is that one, make sure that you turn on your cameras so that we can have some really great conversation and I can see your face as I'm saying things that make sense and or don't make sense. And when I'm able to see that visual cue, I can ask questions. The second thing, please mute yourself unless you're going to be talking. Also update your name and your initials of your organization. The materials that you're going to need for today, you can either have them digitally or you can have them printed off, is your 24 strengths chart, your VIA strengths report, your radical candor worksheet and your guide, and also your SBI worksheet and your guide. Let me check the chat. It seems like there seems to be, oh, yeah, not an Adele fan. What? Right. Yeah, maybe I am. I was dancing pretty hard to her. But yeah, so from last week's session, no, we're actually not going to jump into last week's session. I actually want to start this session off with a little bit of an energy booster. And so the first thing I want you to do is I want everybody to grab their phones, right? And I want you to go into the pictures of your phones, the picture section of your phone, and I want you to find a photo that brings you joy and what character strengths are represented in that photo. And so I have a picture here. This is me and my wife. I outkicked my coverage. And I have a picture of my wife, and the character strength that it represents for me is love, which again is my 24th strength. But the relationship that I have with my wife is awesome, and you know it's a really really good space for me. So what we're gonna do is everybody grab a photo off of your phone, and we're gonna go into breakout rooms. This will be our warm up activity for the day, and I want you to share the picture that you have and also what character strength that represents in the photo. Did we get are we in breakout rooms yet? No. Maya, are we good on breakout rooms? Okay. There's always that awkward silence before the breakout room button pops up. And so you're just like, wait a minute, did I do this right? Did I not do this right? Um, Joe, what is one of your pictures that you have that brings you joy?
So most of my pictures are either of my dog or my kid, but this is my son Graham. Let me turn the brightness up a little bit. So he has this like giraffe little lovey thing, and sorry, it looks really crazy, but he put this thing on his face. He's 4 months old. Like he wasn't like I don't think he was trying to be funny, but he put it like just landed on his face when he was playing with it, and he just left it there, and it was just hilarious. And he was laughing too. So it's humor, which is one
That
of my top
is.
strengths as well.
That is funny. Nice. Thank you, Maya. So it looks like we can join our breakout rooms. I will see you all back here in about 6 minutes.
Jasmine and Amy, I know I see you guys still down there.
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Did you guys receive a breakout room invitation?
Nope.
Okay, the person that you're with is still like by themselves.
If you click on the breakout rooms, there's either a breakout rooms button at the bottom, or you can click on the little, the three dots. And if you received an invitation, you can go back to it and click on it. Looks like maybe she found it there.
Mm-hmm.
Do we just do people in pairs?
Yeah.
This one?
Does Jordan not have a pair?
That's the downside of doing pairs. When one person has an issue, then
it's okay
someone else
because
is lonely.
Okay.
Jordan's with Katie and KJ. KJ's the only one in the room so far.
Got it.
Hi, Katie.
Morning.
We can maybe just do this group here.
Yeah. Yeah, we can do that. How much time do we have left, Maya?
It says we have 3 minutes and 30 seconds.
All right, excellent. Katie, it looks like you're going to be with us. So, and that's okay. And Ashley, it looks like you're going to be with us too. So here's what we want to do. I want you to grab your phone and I want you to find a picture that brings you joy. And I want you to share with me the picture, share with the group what the picture is, and then also what character strength that photo represents. Again, Joe just showed a picture of his son that had a giraffe on his face like this. Clearly it represents humor. And then I showed a picture of myself and my wife that represents love, because that's awesome. Janice showed a photo of Janice. I actually didn't see your photo.
No, you didn't. So here, I just pulled it up. So the first one that came up was this cake I made, my mother's old-fashioned apple cake, and she's no longer with us. So when I made it just a few weeks ago, it was just love, really love for my family and for myself. And I haven't made it in years, so it was also kind of perseverance. And it brought me joy. It's making me hungry now. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Feel free to send some to my address. So Katie, do you have one? Ashley, do you have a photo?
Sure. Well, I mean, every photo on my phone is just a picture of my cat. So there's my cat.
Oh, nice.
One of them.
Okay.
I guess it's just like, I don't know, humor. Like he's such a goofy. They're so weird. And like I raise weird cats and they're weird and I don't know, bring us a lot of joy. And they're zest. I may not be zest, but they're zest.
Nice. Nice. So they're
They're
toning
nothing
up
but zest. I wish they would stop being so zestful.
Gotcha.
How many do you have?
I have two. I have two, and they're nonsense. They're just little shits who.
Is that their names? Nonsense and little shits?
Yes.
That is hilarious.
Just goof around all day long. So, yeah.
Nice. Ashley, did you want to share a photo that you have?
Sure. I won't go searching because I put mine on my lock screen. So I have a photo of my sister and myself, and then my youngest sister. You can't really see her, but this is at my sister's baby shower. She was the last of the siblings to have a baby.
Wow. Congratulations.
Yeah. Yeah. He's, how old is he? 6 months, 7 months now. So it was a while ago, but yeah, it brings me joy. I saved it just now that I'm the oldest sibling. So myself and all of my sisters all have babies now. So it's
nice.
Yeah, so it brings me joy. And I was trying to look at the character strengths. I know definitely love, definitely hope, spirituality. What partners did you talk to?
Why spirituality? That's interesting.
Oh, having a child and being with child is such a
Spiritual
spiritual
experience.
experience. Oh yes, definitely.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I mean, I could go all the way if you want, but just you can imagine it's
Yeah.
definitely a spiritual experience. So,
All right.
1
and
minute
then
left, and so
also,
I'm sending the reminder out just so you
okay.
guys know.
Okay. All right. Go ahead. Continue.
Oh no, I was just gonna say it brings out the spirituality, you know, covering our children with prayer and all of those things as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing.
So
I
how
probably-
many cousins are there now?
There are 5.
Oh,
Five.
so lucky.
And
That's so
I'm the only one with the girls. All of them have boys. I don't have any nieces yet. So, but
they got to get back to work.
right.
Oh man, that is funny. It looks like the entire team is coming back. So I want 2 people to share out what their photo is, and then also the character strength that represents. We were having a pretty good conversation around spirituality and children and humor and cats that are super zestful. But who's going to jump in and share their picture and also what character strength that represents?
Hey.
All right.
Pick myself up.
Me,
Oh,
Maurice,
okay.
right?
Yeah. Yes.
So I cheated. Mine's actually a video.
All right.
Now,
Is it short?
yeah, very short.
All
Yeah.
right, cool.
Come on.
All right. All right.
So it's actually a video of my buddy came over yesterday and he's singing "Outstanding" by the Gap Band.
Mm-hmm.
Hold on, let me see if I can.
Yeah.
So it's very humorous. Humor is one of my top 5, and I found it very funny and joyful, and decided to share that one with us.
Nice.
Make it go
That's a
viral.
good one. Yeah. Have you posted it yet to YouTube and then remixed it?
He has.
Okay.
His Instagram story and all that good stuff. So
Got you. Okay. Anybody else? One more person.
I'll go.
All right.
Jordan. Oh, it's Jordan. But
Yeah.
So this is my picture. This is me and my mom graduation. And so I came up with 2 strengths, and it was kind of for both of us. Like it was for me, it was gratitude for my mom, because my mom, the first 3 years of school, was paying like some crazy amount of money to make sure I went to Bowling Green. And so I was, I wouldn't have been able to get there without her support and her making those sacrifices and showing that strength. And perseverance was mine, because by the time I got towards the end of the journey, it was kind of like I was already over it and was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And I wasn't even excited on my graduation day because I had so many just confusion on what I was going to do. But perseverance, overcoming it, getting a degree. And so, yeah, that was mine.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for sharing. That's actually super awesome. I went to University of Toledo, so I'm very familiar with Bowling Green and all that Bowling Green has to offer. So I understand senioritis very well, and the decisions that you have to make once you graduate from school. So thank you for sharing. Big up to your mom. Hopefully you strength spotted her last week in the text, just basically saying, "Hey mom, thanks for everything." But yeah, we did this because, again, sometimes you need just a little boost of positive emotion, and sometimes we should spend more time. We should create the habit of going back in our lives and looking at the times where we've had the most fun. Now, listen, guys, we're already at 9:47. Time is literally flying. So I'm gonna have to run through these next few slides so that we can actually get to the good stuff. So the first thing that I want to do is do a quick recap of the independent learning assignment, which was the one about uniquely your strengths. We actually reflect on how your top strengths show up for you uniquely at work. And as you recall, this prompt is from the employee snapshot tool that we shared with you at the end of last session. This tool and this particular strength reflection is a great way to better understand the how and why your colleagues show up at work, right? And for managers, this is a great tool for you to get to know your people. And for everybody else, this is level of individual reflection is super helpful for building self-awareness and more consistently leaning into your strengths. So here's a couple of excerpts. I'm not going to read them all just because I gotta catch up on time. The first thing, Maria said judgment and prudence. She says, I do not jump to conclusions, and she considers all the angles. I absolutely feel like this is an awesome, spot on look. If you go back into Schoology and read what Maria wrote, it's actually a really great way to see how judgment and prudence can show up for a person. Maddie said that perspective and judgment, she assesses things from all of the different angles before she makes decisions. And that's actually extremely helpful in the way that you work. And then there's Liz, who said that honesty, bravery, and kindness, it ultimately brings everything that she does from a place of care and investment, which is a really great mix of strengths in order for you to be able to not only show up as the best part of yourself, but understanding that honesty, bravery, and kindness work together in order for her to get things done. That's awesome. The second thing that I wanted to do is talk a little bit about radical candor. That was our first assignment, and we wanted to reflect on how that shows up for you. So here's some examples from those reflections when we think about radical candor. Sydney actually started us off with prudence, perspective, and judgment. She said that she's been through some professional development at Tolber House, and she learned through this assessment the way that she had an avoidant conflict style. So she leverages those skills of prudence, perspective, and judgment to make sure that she's remaining in that space of radical candor. The next person, Catherine, she used kindness and love of learning. Again, her top strength is kindness, and she wants to use that strength to make sure that she is giving the right feedback at the right time to the right person. She also uses that love of learning to when she's thinking about supervising and training folks. So that's really awesome. Also, we have Alex, social intelligence, honesty, perspective, kindness, fairness, and leadership. That is his foundation for trust. So he literally takes all, I don't know if these are your top five, Alex, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, your top six, Alex. But yeah, to create this foundation of trust in order for you to be able to give really great feedback to folks is extremely important. And then finally, last but not least, is Alexandra, and she uses honesty, fairness, kindness, and gratitude to be able to give really great feedback to her team. All right, so as you might recall, this is our theory of change. We think that we focus on the individual, giving them the tools that they need in order for them to not only show up as the best version of themselves, but also in doing so, we hope that that person and that team can create an environment where the other people on their team can show up as the best version of themselves also by, again, leveraging their strengths. We believe that organizational change happens at that individual level. And then when you get to the team level, it changes the way that we work. And then through this work, we hope to support teams that maximize the strengths of everyone. And it also helps us foster really great relationships and navigate the hardest parts of our work, which is usually strengths collisions. And then once we're able to create strong teams, the goal is for that to ultimately impact the entire organization, where we can begin to create policies and systems and structures that will not only allow us to show up as the best version of ourselves by leveraging our strengths, but also put into place some, I was going to use the word legislation, but ultimately just systems that and policies that would create environments where we can not only be extremely positive, but it will create a culture where people want to work. Now, we have about 6 sessions. Well, we don't have about 6 sessions. We have 6 sessions, and we are on our 5th session, and time is literally flying. As you remember, in our first session, we talked about strengths and how they show up for us personally. We also talked about how negativity bias is our natural reaction to life that is ultimately keeping us safe, but when it's overused, it can ultimately hold us back. We have talked about how teams can identify strengths in each other and how to strength spot. But today we are going into strong organizations. This is my favorite part because we get to talk about radical candor, and it's the framework that we can use to provide feedback, both good and bad, in order to create a more open and trusting environment. But the bottom line in all of this is that in our 5th session, we really want you to know that this is all about you being at your absolute best as individuals and as teams. And we want to be able to create a space where you can do your best work. All right. So here are the 2 foundations of strong organizations. The first step in this effort is to build a culture of feedback. Changing culture is hard, right? Team members need to be able to do both, give and receive feedback. You want to be able to give and receive praise and criticism. But along the way, we have to be able to navigate challenges successfully. And we usually can't do that if we're not having the hard conversations. Teams that avoid conflict and don't share feedback, they don't take the time to meaningfully appreciate one another, and also take the time to actually say, this is what it takes for us to get better, will ultimately plateau, and their change efforts will kind of just fall off. That's why we've chosen to focus on this topic so prominently. Secondly, oh, whoa. Secondly, monitoring and supporting staff well-being is a critical component of a strength-based culture. In StrongWorks Part 2, we'll revisit the PERMA well-being framework. We'll take a pulse check of your team's well-being, and we'll share strategies and tools for boosting, measuring, and supporting well-being across your organization through strengths. Ultimately, it's important to remember that these two components go hand in hand. A strong culture of feedback supports workplace well-being because it creates spaces for people to have honest conversations about what's going well and what we could do better in terms of well-being. And practicing radical candor, which we'll be diving into in a moment, is all about just creating this space where you can actually say what's real without weaponizing the honesty that is attached to it. So here's what we have on tap today. We have our intro and our agenda. We've walked through that. We're going to do a deep dive into radical candor. Then we're going to jump into this introduction to SBI, which Janice is going to lead. And then we're going to talk about what we're going to be doing next week. So we'll focus on our homework, and then we'll do our session evaluations. All right. All right. Okay. So first thing I want to do is we're going to go into breakout sessions, and we're going to talk about the most meaningful feedback that we've ever had in our lives. In Strong Teams, we spend time diving into how strengths can be both used to strengthen relationships and to navigate challenging ones. In terms of strengthening relationships, we explored how strength spotting can create a ripple effect of positive emotion throughout our organization. We also discussed how recognizing and leveraging strength synergies can lead to some of the most amazing dynamic duos and high performing teams, like peanut butter and strawberry jelly. Um, on the flip side, we've also explored how strengths can be used to navigate relationship challenges. We've explored strengths overuse and underuse, and how over and underuse can lead to strengths collisions. And then finally, we introduced the STOP method as a way to navigate challenging relationships through a strength-based lens. Whether strengths are being used to boost relationships or deal with hard ones, one thing is consistently true. A culture of feedback is important. So we're going to begin this session by reflecting on our own experience with feedback. So please note that we are not referring to the feedback where we're talking about the critical conversations, those high stakes, nerve wracking, let me write down in your evaluation things. This is like the feedback that you may get where it's extremely honest. It can come across as critical, but it is important for your development as not only as a professional, but also in your life. One example that I have that I always tell is one of my very first managers at the Urban League in Toledo. I had a boss named Brandon Tucker. I was young. I was probably like 22, and I was really young in my career. And it was the first time that I was in these meetings with high level stakeholders. And I at the time I felt that anytime that a person would give me pushback on my ideas, that it was actual attack on my character or attack on my ability. And I found myself lots of times pushing back on the pushback that I received in every meeting. And Brandon came to me after going to one of these infamous meetings that I had at the United Way and said, Phil, if all you have is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail. And you are literally in this situation, not creating people to work with, you are creating enemies because you're not even accepting their feedback as a way to create a better product. And so, at the time I was mad and I was taking his feedback as a way for me to like push back on him. But what I realized is that he was ultimately telling me that I needed to, one, relax, pump my brakes, and two, create an environment where there was collaboration and not competition. And, that actually had a huge impact on my career because I was able to go on and do some really great things at the Urban League and in those partnerships that we were able to develop at the United Way. But, it took a lot of time to get there, a lot of coaching to get there. And he took the time to like really walk me through what creating collaboration really is about comparatively to creating competition. So I want you to go into your breakout sessions, and I want you to talk about the most meaningful feedback that you have ever received in your career and potentially even in your home life. A 100%, 40%, 99%, 75%, 50%. Ashley said, thanks, Jordan. 60%, 65%. So it ranges. It's a range, right? So in a recent study by Zinger and Folkman, it said that 94% of survey respondents agree that critical feedback is effective at improving performance. Now, I want you to jump back into the chat, and I want you to answer this second question. And this question is, what percent of people do you think say they would work harder if they felt their efforts were better recognized? What percent of people? 100% of people, 95%, 100% of people will work harder if they had better feedback, if they felt their efforts were better recognized. Anybody else? 100%. I'm seeing lots of 100%, a 75%. Hope said 75%. Anybody else? All right. So about 70%. So in another study, nearly 70% of survey respondents said that they would work harder if they felt their efforts were better recognized. So letting people know when they're doing good work is a critical component of feedback. In fact, several studies suggest that meaningful praise actually has a much greater impact on employee performance than criticism. I don't know if you guys remember, but in earlier one of our sessions, we talked about how Harvard Medical School did a research study at Wharton about taking a group of individuals who were breaking a group of people who work in a call center into two groups. There was a group that was going to give feedback at the beginning of their session, and there was the group that didn't get any feedback for the session. And the group that got positive feedback at the beginning of their work shift and or session, they actually did 50% more calls. And so it was just a proof that feedback helps. Positive feedback is really productive. It gives people enough energy to continue to do their job at a really high level. In addition to that, we've never talked about this. There's this idea of the 5-to-1 rule, which is really about for every negative interaction that you were to have with a person, or every time that you have to give some level of critical feedback, you need to have 5 positive reactions. Because again, that's the way for you to be able to balance out the relationship between the good and the bad. You don't want it to be, and this usually happens with managers, that every time that you show up as a manager, as a leader, or even as a person on the team, that there's always conflict. There's always some level of critical feedback. There's never just a time for you guys to talk about the things that you're doing well. If all you do is provide feedback that is negative, then chances are you're going to lose your team. But you can't be all positive either, but we'll get more to that. So yeah. Okay. So I want you to jump back into the chat, and I want you to take a look. I want you to guess on this second one, because we can see the same study that there's a very interesting disconnect as it relates to providing feedback and people receiving feedback. So I'm going to ask you this question: what percent of leaders rate themselves as highly effective at providing others with honest, straightforward feedback? 75%, 60%, 65%, 91%. I'm seeing 85%, 60%. Davina says 60% of leaders consider themselves to be good at giving feedback. She's really close. 62% of leaders rated themselves as highly effective at providing others with honest, straightforward feedback. Now, my question becomes, what is the number of employees that say they have not received any useful feedback in the past 6 months? And you can type this into the chat. What is the percentage of employees who say they have not received useful feedback in the last 6 months? 70%, 50%, 33%. Colleen, you're really nice. Katie says 50%. So here's what it is. So While 62% of leaders rate themselves as being highly effective at sharing honest, straightforward feedback, 60% of employees say they have not received any useful feedback in the last 6 months. So somebody here is not telling the truth. But the bottom line is, while many of us think that we do a good enough job at sharing feedback, the reality is most of us could do a better job. And most of us actually fall into one of these three categories or strategies when it comes to feedback. The first one, and I know you've all heard of this, is the sandwich, right? Many people use the sandwich approach. I have no idea where the sandwich approach came from. I actually call this the poop sandwich, where you start with saying something really nice, then you say what it is that you're supposed to say, which is that critical piece of feedback, and then you end the conversation with something that is, again, really nice. And the goal there is to like make the job of sharing straightforward, hard feedback with a person. The goal there is to make it easier for the person to deliver it, right? So you just want to, it's the idea of like a spoonful of sugar will make the medicine go down. But the reality is, it just ends up being super confusing. Now, think about this for a moment. If you were to give the poop sandwich feedback, here's how it usually goes. It goes, hey, Phil, it's really good to see you. That's a nice shirt that you're wearing today. I want to let you know that I really love having you on my team. But the thing that has really been bothering the team is that you keep showing up and you're talking all the time. And that's just really bothersome to the team and actually taking us off task. But I want to let you know that you're really good at your job and I enjoy having you here. So that's how usually poop sandwiches go. That's how usually we as managers have been delivering feedback for years. I'm not even sure where this came from. But again, that was so confusing and so non-specific that it doesn't even help you at all, right? The second strategy, this is the volcano. And I don't know I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but I have been the volcano before. I've also been the deliverer and server of the feedback sandwich. But the volcano is usually what happens where, all of the things that you haven't been doing correctly and all of the things that probably needed some consistent feedback at the moment were never talked about. And then one day, boom, you blow up. Or a person blows up on you. And then you start to learn all the things that you feel like you probably could have made a change during the year about, and you never get there. Because that information was never shared with you. The volcano is like literally when somebody blows up. And then third, this is the third one, is where you just totally avoid the conflict altogether. You just fade to black like Homer. You just like when a tough conversation comes, we ultimately end up in a space where we don't even talk about it. So again, I can honestly say that I have been all three of these people. And, the question becomes, is there a better way? And I will say that there is. So here's what we want to do is we're going to display a poll question. And I want you to tell me, what are the two core principles behind radical candor? Is it sharing profusely and arguing kindly? Is it caring personally and challenging directly? Is it talking openly and criticizing aggressively? Is it caring obsessively and challenging the status quo? This should be a pretty easy one.
Got 15 respondents so far. We'll leave it open for another 10 seconds. Got 19 in there now. 3, 2, and 1. When pulling. There we go. Everyone got this one right.
Yeah, absolutely. So caring personally and challenging directly. I mean, radical candor is pretty simple. It's all about caring about the people that you work with and then bringing your authentic self to work. And it's about challenging directly, right? Giving people a type of clear and candid praise. You hear that? Candid praise and criticism they need to do their best work. It might seem like these two components are at odds with each other, but they are really not. Let me end this poll. Let me stop sharing. It might seem like they're at odds with each other, but they're actually not. Radical candor is an approach that individuals can adopt to their work with each other and a component of culture that organizations can adopt. We've included as part of the Strong Cincinnati Institute because we know that a strong culture of feedback is essential for organizations to build thriving cultures in which everybody can do their best work. So why is it radical? this all sounds easy, right? The idea that you can just care for people and then also challenge them directly. But the reality is that our conditioning up to this point has always been to like say things that are nice, to be professional, to not challenge the status quo. From a young age, many of us are taught that if you are not going to be saying something that's nice, you shouldn't even be saying it at all, right? And as we get older, that manifests itself in the avoidance of sharing tough feedback. And then when we think about the idea of challenging directly, we become afraid because we just haven't had the practice. But in reality, not sharing tough feedback with somebody is the thing that can be the most painful. Tough feedback is a way that is both kind and clear, is the humane, productive, and supportive thing to do. In addition, when we enter the world of work, we frequently get messages, both explicit and implicit, about acting professionally, which oftentimes means being polite, but not bringing your full self into your work or truly getting to know the people around us. So cultural expectations also influence the way people navigate professionalism. In reality, we're all human beings with human feelings, and even at work, we need to be seen as such. So when we have to repress who we really are to earn a living, we become alienated. And when people don't feel like we give a damn about them beyond their ability to contribute to the results, we we alienate those people. But the good news is that focusing on building a strength-based culture can help create a culture of caring personally and challenging directly. And we'll dive into that just a little bit more. So here's the thing. What are the alternatives? What are the alternatives to radical candor? When you care personally, hold on. When you care personally, but you don't challenge directly, you fall into something called ruinous empathy, right? Then when you do care personally, but you do not challenge directly. Well, when you don't care personally and you do not challenge directly, that's called manipulative insincerity. And then one of my personal favorites, actually, it's not, where you challenge directly, but you don't care personally. It's called obnoxious aggression. And then finally, when you care personally and also challenge directly, that is radical candor. But nobody actually lives in radical candor all day, every day. And so I really want to take some time for us to walk through each one of these quadrants. And so let's start with ruinous empathy. The question is, what is it? Ruinous empathy is when you care, but you don't challenge, right? So the praise is not specific, or the criticism that is sugar coated and unclear. So what I want to do is I want to actually have a poll question come up here where we ask the question, which of these is not an example of ruinous empathy? Which of these is not an example of ruinous empathy?
We got 14 people in. We'll give it another 10 seconds. And 3, 2, and 1. Here are results. We got 22% said non-specific praise like good job. We had 11% say criticism that avoids the real issue. The majority, 67%, said screaming at someone in front of the team to make an example. And that would be the correct answer. That is not an example of ruinous empathy. All the others here, including the feedback sandwich, are.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. That's super awesome. Screaming at someone in front of the team to make an example is actually going to be an example of something different that we'll talk about later. But let's get a little bit deeper into what ruinous empathy is. Ruinous empathy really is when you care but you don't challenge. It also ends up being where the praise that isn't specific or criticism that is sugar coated and unclear. How does it show up? Hold on. Why is my Oh, why does it happen? It usually happens to avoid tension or discomfort at work, and it's worrying about hurting other person's feelings. What it usually looks like is that non-specific praise, like good job, or the criticism fails to address the actual issue. And then it's also avoidance of asking for feedback to prevent the awkwardness. Um, I used to be the captain of like, good job, guys, or you're a rock star, which actually didn't help anybody. involved, Joe actually tells a really great story about ruinous empathy. Joe, did you want to share that?
What if I said no? Just kidding.
That would be
Yeah,
radical
I'm happy to
candor.
share it. So I think one example to bring this to life, again, ruinous empathy is about concern about hurting other people's feelings. So, and this is one, Phil, you might be ready to say this, or you already said it, but about 75% of feedback mistakes, according to Kim Scott, the author of Radical Candor, happen in this quadrant. This is the one that most people fall into if they don't fall into fall into Radical Candor. I would say the same thing for me. I saw several comments in the Schoology chat about, people who are high in kindness, right? Sometimes for me, same thing. Sharing really direct feedback that might be difficult for someone to hear can feel like it's like not a nice thing to do. And so that's a challenge that is important to overcome. For me, a quick example that hopefully not too many of you have experienced this before, but maybe you have, is I had to let someone go from a job in a previous role. This person I had actually known for quite a while, had worked with for quite some time. And the challenge is when I had to share that news with her, her response was, wow, I really wish I would have known. I wish I would have known all along that there were so many problems. Why didn't you tell me? And that was just like really, really painful to hear, and it still sticks with me because it made me realize that over time I had withheld feedback from her that she really needed to hear to be able to do well, because I was afraid of hurting her feelings, afraid of making her feel like she wasn't doing a good enough job. And the end result was that there was no other choice but to let her go. And there's nothing worse than when that is a complete shock to someone. It's never a fun thing to do. So ruinous empathy can seem like sort of okay, I'm just kind of withholding the feedback, but in its worst cases, it can lead to really, really negative outcomes, including something like that.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe, for sharing that. That actually is a great example of ruinous empathy, and a great way for us to start to think about what we do as leaders and as managers with our teams. I know with Joe saying that, again, 75% of us fall into this space. It's, again, we're afraid to actually share or challenge directly. That's really the biggest issue in all of this. All right, let's move on to manipulative insincerity. This is when you don't care personally and you do not um, challenge directly. What is it? It's when you neither care nor challenge, and the praise is non-specific and insincere, or criticism that is neither clear nor kind. Why does it happen? It usually happens because we're too focused on being liked. We attempt to gain some sort of political advantage by being fake, or you're just too tired to care or to argue anymore. And then finally, what does it look like? It usually ends up looking like flattery, backstabbing, false apologies, telling people what they want to hear to benefit yourself, and giving up because it's just not worth it anymore. So now we're going to launch a poll, and we're going to ask the question. This is going to be the question, which is, which of the following is not an example of manipulative insincerity? Is it backstabbing? Is it taking it easy on somebody but just not sharing feedback with them? Is it telling people what they want to hear? Is it just giving up and not saying anything at all?
All right, we've got 9 responses. We'll give it another 10 seconds or so. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, and polling. Here are the results. 3 people say backstabbing, 12 people who said taking it easy on someone by just not sharing feedback with them. We had 11% or 2 people telling people what they want to hear. And lastly, just giving up and not saying anything at all. There was a little bit of a cheat mode on this because you could actually see on the slide, but the majority of people got this one right. So taking it easy on someone by just not sharing feedback with them. So the key difference between manipulative insincerity and ruinous empathy is about where the focus is. For ruinous empathy, the focus is on others, not wanting to put others in a negative situation. For manipulative insincerity, it's all about you and not wanting to put yourself in an uncomfortable situation. So if you're taking it easy on someone else, that's really more of an example of ruinous empathy.
Yeah, absolutely. Janice, did you want to share an example of when you've been in this space?
Yeah, I thought you might ask. It brings me back to such a lovely memory from my corporate years, really at Macy's, and I'm working with people in New York, and they're very demanding. These are merchants, and I'm working on a recognition program, and we have to deliver trophies at a certain time for an event they're having. And I have gone, so all I want to do is people please them. I want them to like me. I want them to, not create any friction, because the friction will come right back at me through my management down on, land in my lap, like with a big thump. And so I'm always like just trying to be PC and pleasing them, people pleaser. So I say yes to everything. We can make it happen. And I don't tell them what's going on behind the scenes. So we had a deadline. They think that the trophies haven't arrived in New York. I know they have arrived. I'm still in this manipulative insincerity. I'm not giving any pushback. It's 7 o'clock. The trophies at night, and the trophies have to be there the next morning. They're still accusing me of not sending them. And so my manipulative insincerity then just, ran its way into obnoxious aggression, and I imploded. I had one of those volcano moments where I just was ready literally to give up my whole job, because I let out an F-bomb to them on the phone, because I went from being really passive aggressive and just like people pleasing to like obnoxiously loud and angry in a flash of emotion and probably really hangry. And I was so embarrassed. And of course, it all worked out the next day. They did have the trophies. They were on the landing dock the whole time. And then you'll learn this about obnoxious aggression. At least I got it out, because quite frankly, they apologized to me the next day. They realized that they had been too demanding in some ways. But I really regret that I hadn't been honest with them, told them what the issues were, and then handled it, with a caring but direct kind of feedback mode, because I felt really bad. That's me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. This is a safe space, and clearly Joe and Janice are sharing like stories from their past that kind of are uncomfortable things to deal with. But this is the best part about radical candor and creating this space that is psychologically safe, is for us to be able to acknowledge those times where we did live in a space that we didn't want to be when we were outside of radical candor. So Janice, thank you again for sharing that. And then finally, there's the obnoxious aggression, which is when you challenge but you don't care, and the praise, it doesn't feel sincere, the criticism that isn't delivered kindly. So let's launch the poll. Which of the following is not an example of obnoxious aggression? Which is not an example of obnoxious aggression? A command and control approach to management, saying talk to the hand, discouraging the sharing of praise, embarrassing people in front of others. Again, remember that which of the following is not an example of obnoxious aggression?
We've got 9 responses, 11. Okay, we'll do about 10 more seconds here. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. End polling. Share the results. All right. We had 47% say a command and control approach to management. We had 7% say talk to the hand. Discouraging the share praise was 40%. That makes me laugh. Embarrassing people in front of others, 7%. So the correct answer is like a little bit of a trick question, is actually saying talk to the hand. That was meant to be kind of a joke. I guess technically that could be obnoxious aggression if you said it really in an aggressive way. But the others are examples of obnoxious aggression, including a command and control approach. Phil, you'll probably share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Joe. So obnoxious aggression is usually, it happens in insecurity, right? There's this lack of empathy or desire for command or power. Is the belief in that old school model of authority. And then what does it look like? It looks like belittling others, embarrassing people publicly, freezing somebody out, and permitting personal attacks among team members, and discouraging praise and targeting vulnerabilities. The funny thing about obnoxious aggression is that it can be oversimplified, right, as just being mean. but the reality is it's actually the second best place for a person to be when they're outside of radical candor, because at least in that situation, a person is clear about what it is that they're communicating and that they're challenging you directly on the things that you need to work on. What I will not encourage people to do, though, is to pick this up as the way to be in this space of obnoxious aggression. I've actually been obnoxiously aggressive throughout my career, and it's interesting that we actually have Bobby Knight, my basketball coach in high school, was an obnoxiously aggressive man, and it was like the worst leadership that I ever had. But I always knew where I stood with him. If I was doing something that was outside of the scope of the job that I was given, he made it very clear in front of everybody that I was not doing the right thing. And so I picked that up early in my career when I first started to work, that I was very clear that this was not the right thing for you to be doing. And I would do it in front of everybody. And what it did is that I ended up in a space where people knew where they stood, but I also lost my team. And so, I would encourage people not to live in this space. I would encourage people to, again, be in this radical candor space. But if you were to fall into one space and you're leading a team, this potentially is the best place for you to be. All right.
Phil, could I say one thing quick before as you transition to the next slide? So Phil said something really important earlier about the fact that no one lives in radical candor 100% of the time, even when we're really working on that. We all kind of move around in these different ways. The other thing that's really important is that these are not about personality. This isn't about labeling someone as being an obnoxiously aggressive person or a ruinously empathetic person or a manipulatively insincere person. These are about behaviors. These are behaviors that people are exhibiting that can, in theory, be modified, right? So this isn't about, and it's also similar to when we talk about overuse and underuse, how that concept is really best used, especially first, as a self-reflection tool on how we are showing up. Same thing for radical candor. This is best used for you to reflect on your own feedback practices and not to, be tempted to think about all those people in your life and kind of where they tend to fall. So just would share that additional, just a little bit there as you're thinking about this model.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Yeah, that's actually a really, really great point. All right, so let's do a simple example, right? And I want you guys to chat this in. So let's say that we are at lunch, right? And lunch is over and we're all going to a big meeting. And I walk in and I have some I have some spinach in my teeth, and it's right there in the front of my face. My question becomes, and you can put this into the chat. What do you do? How do you share that information with the person they have a big chunk of spinach in their teeth? And you can just put it into the chat. Are you going to be ruinously empathetic? Are you going to be manipulative and insincere? Are you going to be aggressive? Are you going to be in radical candor? How do you do it? Or do you even say anything at all? Janice actually brings that up. Do you even say anything at all? So a coworker walks into the room, or I walk into the room, and I have a big chunk of food right here in the front of my teeth, a big bunch of spinach. How do you tell me that I have this food in the front of my teeth? Yeah, but how do you do it? I guess I was a little unclear how I was. Okay, Melissa said you just go up to them quietly and say that you have something in their teeth. You take them to the side and you tell them. You pull them to the side and you say it. Jordan says, "Hey, you got food in your teeth. Go ahead and get that together." All right. Make a subtle emotion. Make a little motion like, "Hey, you got something in there." Anybody else? Katie says, "Oh, hey, girl, you got a little," and then points to your teeth. That's a good one. Anybody else? It depends on the person. That's true. That is true. Or do you not tell them because they just came from a meeting and that means that they had it and they probably feel really bad? Alex says that he's going to ask him a question. Are you saving that spinach for later? Okay. All right. These are all really good. So we're going to walk through this simple example. And the first way, if you're in ruinous empathy, you say nothing, right? You're worried about hurting the other person's feelings, and maybe they'll notice it themselves. The next one is you say nothing because you're worried about your own feelings of being judged or not liked, right? Like, what if I say something to them and then they're mad at me because I told them that they had something in their teeth? And then there's obnoxious aggression where you're just playing meat and you're like, hey, I think somebody forgot to floss today. Or your radical candor is when you maybe whisper to them quietly, like, hey, I think you got some food in your teeth. And I always appreciate it when somebody tells me, I hope you don't mind. Again, these are all great examples, and there are millions of different examples of how we can be radically candid, or how we have been in these different spaces of ruinous empathy, manipulative insincerity, and obnoxious aggression. This is just one of those simple examples that we probably have all been in at one time or another, that will allow us to really just know where we are. So we've been at this for a little while now, just a little bit over an hour. And so what I want to do is give you about 4 minutes to go and stretch, grab some water, maybe take a bio break, and be back here by 10:42.
Often fallen. As Joe said, and Phil said, it's not like we are ruinous empathetic. We just move in and out of these quadrants at different times, but we tend to even, maybe we're all thinking and top of mind, so we're kind of being more radically candid now, but historically, or even just like last week, where did you tend to fall? What was the quadrant that you just most instinctively fall in? And which of your strengths are at play? Maybe there's an underuse or an overuse of your strengths that puts you in that group, right? In that quadrant. So we'd love you to think about that. Where are you most often finding yourself when you give feedback? We're going to put you into groups, 3-person groups for 8 minutes. Okay, so you'll go round robin pretty fast. Thanks. We may feel more comfortable with, and it's about intentionally making a shift. So one of the tools that you can use is called reframing, and that's looking at your strengths, knowing that, it's a little bit scary to give feedback, especially critical feedback, but even positive feedback sometimes where you just feel embarrassed. But if we can reframe it, find a motivation, what's driving us, by looking at one of our top strengths. So for instance, feedback. Yeah, I don't love giving critical feedback, because even, especially with the people I like on my team. But if I reframe it, because creativity is my thing, it's my top strength. So I love brainstorming solutions. So I love sort of being a mentor to encourage other people's creativity. And so whatever issue they're dealing with, if I see that my feedback is going to allow us to have a conversation where we can kind of figure out how to problem solve their issue gently, because sometimes it's not always about giving them the answers, but asking how can we get out of this, encouraging them to think differently. So I see it as like a creative brainstorming session rather than critical feedback. I've reframed that feedback so it doesn't give me the agita that it normally would, and it turned it into something really positive. So reframing is one way you might do it. And then of course, another is combining. And that is often, I know a lot of you, when you gave your feedback on your assignment in Schoology, you all talked about how you bring together 2 or 3 or sometimes 5 different strengths to help with your, to become the filter for that feedback. So if, like for instance, here we show honesty and social intelligence. So yes, honesty is great, but also knowing, as you said, navigating that of that relationship, knowing the context, knowing, the history, right? Where you came from, who else they know in your organization, knowing all that. So then just trying to temper it and maybe adding in a little kindness, a little perspective, all of that. So think consciously before you go into that meeting about, sort of center yourself and say, I'm going to try, because even if you just say the words, I'm going to use honesty and kindness, let's say. You go in, that's how you'll start your conversation, and it will be top of mind. I know, with humor, we always have to be cautious. If humor is your thing, humor can often offend. You don't mean to, and you don't even necessarily know it. The person might be still laughing at your joke. So you always have to, go in. If humor is your top strength, make sure you don't overuse it. So you maybe toe it down a little bit. You mix it with something like kindness or love. so that, or prudence even, that it's tempered a little. So it's just, again, reframing is finding a different motivation that helps you get into that conversation so you don't feel so anxious. And combining is it's starting that conversation top of mind with a couple of your really core strengths that you know are going to help you get to that radically candid quadrant. Any questions before I move on from there? More thoughts? Okay. So I'm going to give you again some feedback tips and some of the things that we talked about. Phil was mentioning share way more praise than criticism. Now that doesn't mean just like keep flattering and complimenting, but know and be aware that statistically, that if you give one piece of criticism, critical feedback, you kind of need to give up to 5, some of the researchers 7 positive things to balance it out. So remember, like people walk away, you can have your annual review and you could have had lots of good things said about you, but what keeps you up all night? What are you talking about your partner with all night long? The one thing that they said that was bad. So it has to be balanced. So make sure that you are giving, and that means making sure praise is top of mind, and in the moment it happens, right? So that you don't have to wait to, it's already setting that environment so that it's fertile ground, so that if you've been saying all these positive things, then when you say the one thing that's a little stingy, it doesn't throw off the whole relationship. Seek out feedback. That's important. So if you are giving feedback, it's really important to ask for feedback too. That means from your person, of course, your supervisor, your manager, the leadership, but also from the people you work with. It's always like, what am I doing? What's working? What's not? You start that conversation and you have to make sure, and it's a lot about body language, that you receive that feedback with humility and generosity and grace to yourself. Like grow that thick skin. Thick skin is really helpful. Doesn't mean you're cold and callous. It just literally means that you're not a mushball. You don't break down, and you can hear the feedback and you hear it through the lens of, it's really just helpful. How can I improve? So seek out the feedback and take it with grace. Okay. In person is the best. So, especially now, that's not always possible, but some kind of Zoom in person, one-on-one is important. Texting, bad, critical feedback. Emailing critical feedback, not good, because you don't have tonality. You don't have the opportunity for questions to happen immediately. You need that one-on-one, that eye contact, that body language, and that heart, really to show from the heart. One thing at a time. So like you can get a mountain if you give too much feedback all at once, or too many things that don't make sense. Then you're just breaking the clear lesson. There's no clarity. It's not. It's not helpful if you bombard somebody with lots of either positive or negative. It just becomes a blur. So it's sort of, that's the poop sandwich, but it's also just more that too many things at once. You need to, people can only process so much at a time. And so simple, clear, precise, and action-oriented is great. Be timely. Okay, so that's me and my husband. We've been married now 32 years almost. And we really never fight, because it's not like we don't get on each other's nerves, but we talk it out fast, right? We don't, very rarely, I can think of maybe 1 or 2 times, we let it fester for more than 20 minutes, because you have to let it out. And you have to have that conversation. You have to make it timely so people can correct. People then can give you that context of, that really was me being hangry. I'm just starving. That's me and my daughter all the time. Like the minute she gets, in that confrontation moment, it's so often about the Snickers bar that she needs. But you need to be timely, right? You need to be in that moment. Be helpful. So that's about, sometimes it means about actually giving or helping with solutions, but often it means asking, how can I help? Because just problem solving for someone else, that's not, you always hear that, like, I just need somebody to be supportive. I just need somebody to ask me questions. I don't need, my kids will always say, don't problem solve for me, right? So, but I do need to be helpful. That might be being an active listener by asking questions, saying, how can I help? We do that a lot at Mayerson. How can I help? How can I support you? And it's a beautiful thing. Consider bias. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this, but also know that whatever confrontation you're having is through your personal bias. We talked about strong conversations and see that we value different strengths differently. If you even remember the dinner table, we come to strengths with a bias. We come to our feedback with a bias as well. So I know, for me, like there's a trigger always, because my father was so kind of rigid and rule oriented, that kind of feedback I get from someone when they're very authoritative kind of, it just triggers, it's a flash hot point with me, hot button. And so I have to know, oh no, don't overreact. Don't take it further than what it is. Take it, distill it into what it's really being said and take the emotion out of it. But that's my bias going in. So we always have to think about bias. So the way, let's talk about that, dig a little deeper. Where does this bias come from? As I talked about, it could be our upbringing. So I just said, my father being very serious kind of guy, that's my bias. And that's his bias giving feedback is to always do that. But so imagine if you grew up in a household where it could either have been, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it, right? That's the rabbit. Or honesty is the best policy. Well, that's a very different strategy that you're like wedded to. It's deep in your values, right? So you come to that in that feedback session and you don't know how the other person was raised or how they grew up or what their mindset is. So you have to be aware of that and navigate that gently. Culture norms. So it's very interesting, and there's been a lot of research, but it and not maybe so surprising that depending on where we grew up. So for instance, Harvard, there was a big research study done and written about in the Harvard Business Review, I think it was 2013, that cultural norms also impact our feedback preferences. For instance, if you're in Germany versus China, but if you're in Germany, tough, critical, to the point, like very specific feedback, it's highly valued. And they rarely celebrate accomplishments. That's just the way they do it in Germany. But in China, in the Chinese culture, positive reinforcement is highly valued, and motivating. And a more direct, critical approach could be demotivating. Maybe those are stereotypes, but maybe there are some cultural things that are really tied to that. No value judgment put on that. That's just the way, the habits, the way people do something. So, so caring personally and challenging directly, it works in both worlds, but it may look different and it may appear different in both worlds. So that's something just to know about, our Eurocentric norms. Implicit biases that we hold are also important. And we talked about that. There's so many, even, I think somebody mentioned earlier, women, how we, so for me, I know when I give feedback woman to woman, it's a little different when I'm having to give feedback to maybe a guy, and maybe he's older than I am, an older guy. And I even have to check myself, like, do I give feedback in a different way, depending, on a lot of different, background situations. And I, sometimes I hold back because I don't want to sound biased. So by trying to overcompensate for my bias, am I being biased? It's not always simple, and it's important to think about all of that, just so that we can be open, right? And open to both receive and give feedback in a way that is heard and embraced. I feel like I'm doing a lot of talking, and I apologize for that, but we will get into a breakout in a second. The last thing to think about when you have feedback tied to identity and experience is your past feedback experiences. So like if you came from a corporate culture where everybody yells at each other, and it's funny, I had my father-in-law who was like classic. He worked at GE corporate, and then he worked at Chase Bank. And he used to always talk about, and this is old school, but they loved to scream at each other, right? They would have meetings and they would encourage that because it was that obnoxious aggression, but it wasn't so, it was tempered in a way that it made sense professionally. They aired it all. And then they would leave and they'll go have lunch and laugh and have, they probably had a martini lunch after that. But the point is that was the culture he was used to. And so that might make sense, might not make sense now if he were, may he rest in peace, but if he were here now, looking at the cultures that we think are more norm, where we are much more open and kind, and we don't necessarily have those kind of aggressive moments because we have a much more diverse workplace that we work in. And yet the accomplishment, the idea that he was able to get out, be clear was really important. And caring was showed by the fact that they had lunch together after. So there's different ways to interpret it, but you should know that you're probably, you know, in some way either bruised or inspired by a past workplace experience or even personal experience. So now we are going to get into breakout rooms, and we're going to do 2-person groups. Well, let's do 3-person groups. Let's do, because sometimes somebody doesn't show up and then it's a 1-person group. That doesn't work. Let's do 3-person groups for about 8 minutes, where you can talk about how your own identity or background maybe did or is impacting the way you give feedback. Like, where does that come from? Is it your culture? Is it your bias? Is it your personally, you know, prior experience? Okay. Any questions before we go in? Alrighty-o. So we'll do 3 persons for 8 minutes or so. And then I'll. Thank you. Thanks, Maya. Example of praise when you're doing SBI is in our project meeting this morning. So you're pinning it to a time so people can visualize where they were. What you did, you brought up important concerns about a new direction we're taking. Impact, it made me confident that I can count on your prudence and judgment, so tie it to strengths, to make sure we're making the best decision for all. Thank you, right? So this is when you did it, this is what you did, this is how its impact was, and tie it to strengths. That's great feedback. That's really, okay, got it, clear, and you cared. Same thing with being critical. And I just want to, for a second, move this. So, you know, situation, when in the team meeting on Monday, you repeatedly interrupted me while I was in the middle of sharing an idea. What was the impact of that? Let them know. It made me feel, and sometimes always saying, you know, it made me feel. So it isn't necessarily that it was, but this is how I reacted to that. It made me feel my ideas were not welcome or valued, and that your decision was already made. It's like, oh my God, when somebody hears that, like, I didn't even know I was doing that. Like, I'm, you know, overusing my zest. Never even realized that me just speaking and interrupting made you feel like you weren't being heard. So then it, again, being able to have criticism, you know, managing up, managing down, but just vocalizing it in a timely manner is so important. You know, yeah, you have to give critical feedback, to do it well, you have to be a little less self-centered in a way. When we think about giving feedback, a lot of times it revolves around how we feel and we want, like we're scared of hurting someone. But the best way to give critical feedback is to get away from our, you know, self-centeredness and really think about what that person needs to hear and how, in order to move forward, you can help them and guide them with that feedback. So does that help? I think, and so, well, hopefully it helps, because now we're going to move into our homework assignment, and you're going to have an opportunity to practice that. So next week, you'll see that there's a worksheet in Schoology. Share some feedback with a colleague in the coming week. And if you can't do it with a colleague, do it with someone in your family, but hopefully share some critical or positive, either one, feedback, but do it in a way that you are using SBI. So you're talking about situation, behavior, and impact. So you'll be able to think it out in advance. And often when we're giving feedback, it is especially for critical feedback, but also really for positive feedback. Because, you know, maybe we instinctively for critical feedback do take the time to think about it. Use good time to also think about and prepare for the positive feedback as well. So SBI, you'll do an example of that. And then also you're going to learn about strengths-based leadership, something we're working on. We'll be diving into deeply next week. This is just looking at a video and then giving your reactions. We will see you next week. And now we want you to, we're going to put in our favorite, the evaluation, because we do want to hear from you what's working, what's not working, how can we improve. So Maya's going to put that into the chat, and then we hope that you will respond. Please, please, please take the 5 minutes to give us your feedback, whatever you can. And we thank you so much, and we hope that you have a great weekend, and can't believe that we have one more session with you, because we're really going to miss you when this is done. But we'll have the network, so we'll get to see you a lot more. So no problem there. But it's always sad when it ends. Okay, thank you so much.